book editor for 20 years at Simon & Schuster, and it was actually really fun because I walked right into the lobby and ran into Annabelle Gurwitch, who's doing another panel, and I had tried to acquire her book many years ago, so it's fun to be reconnected with her. I left book publishing and wanted to write on my own, took a leap of faith, was starting a book, and then one of my former authors, Sarah Pekkanen, had reached out to me and said, why don't we write a book together? And I was like, why are we writing together? Like, why do you want to write with me? You've written all these books alone. She said, I think we could do something really great together. And so we did. We went on to write 4 amazing books together: The Wife Between Us, An Anonymous Girl, You're Not Alone, The Golden Couple. And now I wanted to go back and work on that first book that I'd started all those years ago and do it by myself. So I'm now working on my first solo project. I had my first solo short story came out last spring through Audible called A Show of Faith, and yeah, is that what you wanted? That kind of intro?
That works.
That works, everyone? Okay.
Yeah.
Happy to keep, okay.
Hi, I'm Ashley Audrain. My first book was The Push, which came out a few years ago now. And my second book is The Whispers, which came out in June, which was a Zibby book club pick. And I also used to work in publishing too for just a few years in marketing and publicity before I also thought, okay, I'm going to try this.
Seems like it worked out pretty well for you.
Don't give my team any ideas. They cannot lead. Hi, I'm Katie Sise. So I wrote 3 young adult books that were kind of quirky romantic comedies, and then I started writing. I actually first wrote a nonfiction career guide. That's what started it. I think we actually submitted to Greer. I'm going to go back and look at it. So I actually feel very honored to be sitting up here with all of you. Your books are all so good, and I haven't read yours yet, Swan, but I can't wait to. And so then I wrote 3 young adult books, and my current, I'm writing mysteries and thrillers now, which is just a really fun space to be in. It's really fun writing about adults because they can be on like terrible behavior, and you don't feel like you have to have a moral. I mean, you try to have some good things in there too, but I feel like when I was writing for teens, I always felt like I needed to be this sort of like, have this really good moral in there. And with my adults are constantly behaving, getting up to no good. So I wrote We Were Mothers, and then Open House, and The Break, which was a Zibby pick. And then I have a book called The Vacation Rental, which will make you never want to go to a vacation rental. And that comes out May 1st this year.
Canceling my vacation rental. I'm Sandra Miller, and I'm also a defector from publishing. My first job was with Biking Penguins, so I had a memoir, Trove, A Woman's Search for Truth and Buried Treasure, that came out 4 years ago, and Zibby had me on her podcast and really loved the book. So when my novel Wednesdays at 1, a psychological thriller, was complete, I reached out to Zibby and she said yes. But just backing up a little bit, my husband and I were dating 29 years ago, and he called me one day from work and said that I should close the windows because he had something to tell me. And he said one of his clients, he's a clinical psychologist at McLean Hospital in Belmont. He said one of his clients was stalking us. She was listening outside our window to things we were saying and coming into his therapy session and bringing this information into the therapy sessions. That idea was planted 29 years ago, and it germinated in Wednesdays at 1. So I'm here to tell you, if you're writers and you have an idea or you're working on something that you're not sure about, or you never think it will see the light of day, or you've given up on that project, some of these projects live in us for decades before they actually come to fruition. So come talk to me and we can talk about long-term projects.
Hi, I'm Swan Huntley. I've written a couple novels. My third novel, actually, Zibby was a moderator at this bookstore in LA with another author, and there were like 2 or 3 people in the audience. So that's
one of whom was the videographer from the bookstore. Another was my husband.
That's what I was going to say. And yeah, I don't know. I've always wanted to be a writer. Somebody just asked me that in the lobby, and I've been like, when I was like 6, I was trying to get my friends to write books with me. So I had no other destiny, and I'm very excited about this cover.
Speaking of covers, by the way, as a quick segue, so against the wall over here is Grassa Tito, who works at Zibby Books and is the secret cover designer for many of our covers. So we had a rom-com panel first, and I was curious why those authors had picked rom-coms as a genre and why that felt so right to them. Why this genre for all of you? And did you, I know many of you have straddled different genres and all of that, but like, what is it that appeals to you about this? Do you like scaring yourself? Do you need the adrenaline? Like, what is it deep down? What do you think?
What's funny is I was at an event in East Hampton in the spring, and there was a gaggle of young women, and they said, wow, it's so interesting. All these thriller authors are the nicest group of authors. It's like the darker the book, the nicer the person. So I don't know. But I think for me, I see the world through like the lens of what if. And so this is actually sort of sad, but it's actually really sad. But I just found out my dog is dying of cancer, and he's only 6 years old, but which is horrible. And anyway, but the way that my mind works is my family, we just recently moved into a new apartment, and when we toured that apartment, the woman, I hope nobody knows this family, anyway, was holding this dog that was really sick. So now, of course, in my head, I'm like, oh my God, the apartment is jinxed. So now what I'm working on as like a little short story is like the jinx of this apartment and all these horrible things that are gonna happen. And so what does that say about me that when you talk about your darkest fears, one of your darkest fears is always like your pet dying, right? But a way for me to process the world is just to kind of think about that creatively. So I don't know how that was kind of a weird answer. I don't mean to be a downer, and I'm really happy to be here as a really great distraction. So there we go. I know it's really fucking, excuse me, really sucks. Okay. Anyway.
I'm sorry about your dog. I relate to so much of that, about the sort of the what if, and sort of my mind going to dark places all the time. And you know, when I started writing The Push, I was not setting out to write anything that felt like a thriller or felt like psychological, thriller that way. It just sort of turned into that, and it just sort of happened that way. But I do think that I think that way. I feel like I have a mind that sort of, I cannot help but go to the darker what if of things. But also, I'll say, I was talking to some friends the other day, and I sort of had that makes so much sense, because we were all born in 1982, so we grew up in the 80s and like the 90s, and we were talking about this is just such a contrast. I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old now. And we were talking about how our childhoods were so different than our kids are now, in a sense of what we shield our kids from. We don't want them to see anything scary. We keep the headlines away from them. Like, I turn off the radio sometimes because I don't want them to hear things. But when we were growing up, I mean, I feel like my whole family would sit around and watch like Rescue 911 on like a Friday night, and it was like Dateline, and everything was scary and unsolved mysteries, and everything was so dark when I was growing up, I feel like, and there was no shielding anybody from the terrible stories that were happening. So when I